Have you ever had that feeling, that nagging sense that something in your perfectly ordinary life is just off? Like you're listening to a familiar song, but it's being played at the wrong speed, just enough to make the hairs on your arms stand up. That's what life was like for Hannah Guidry in the small town of Plain Dealing. By late October, the air in Plain Dealing felt heavier than it should have. It was warm, but with a sharp edge, carrying that faint metallic taste that comes right before a storm. In the evenings, you could hear the distant groan of trucks on Highway 3, their engines dragging the night north toward Arkansas. Everything else was still. The pine trees, the dogs sleeping on porches, the thin line of power poles disappearing into the darkness. People called the town peaceful, and it was, as long as you didn't listen too hard. At the heart of the town was Plain Dealing High, a brick building patched with decades of paint, its halls always a few degrees too warm. The fluorescent lights hummed a constant low drone, flickering just enough to remind you how far away the nearest repair crew was. Hannah had been going to that same school since she was in kindergarten. The ticking wall clock in room 107 kept the same steady rhythm she'd heard her entire life. But that fall, something was different. Everything felt slightly out of tune. And then, he appeared. Mr. Marrow. He wasn't introduced with any fanfare. He just materialized one Monday morning where Mrs. Tobin used to stand. The rumors flew, of course. Some said Mrs. Tobin left for health reasons. Others whispered she'd retired early. But nobody really knew for sure. This new man, Mr. Marrow, looked like he'd been pulled from another decade entirely. He wore a crisp, starched collar and a tired gray tie. His eyes seemed to measure the room, as if comparing it to a memory. He took attendance only once, his voice a low monotone. Then he turned to the blackboard and wrote a single, cryptic sentence. Describe the thing this town pretends not to remember. He offered no explanation, no hint of a challenge in his tone. The words just settled over the desks like a fine layer of dust. Most of the students chuckled, thinking it was a joke. A few scribbled down answers about losing the big football game, or the potholes that never got fixed, or the endless cycle of church bake sales. But Hannah just stared at the blank page in front of her until the bell rang, and she handed it in empty. The next day, Mr. Marrow paused at her desk, holding her blank paper. Couldn't think of anything? He asked, his voice soft. There's nothing to forget here, Hannah replied, maybe a little too defensively. He looked from her paper, then back to her face. A strange look passed through his tired eyes. Closer than you think, he said. It should have sounded like encouragement, a teacher trying to coax an answer out of a student. But it landed like a warning. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her room, the ceiling fan turning slow, lazy shadows over the walls. She racked her brain, trying to remember a single unusual thing that had ever happened in her hometown. But there was nothing. Nothing ever happened in Plain Dealing. That was supposed to be its charm. Or maybe she was beginning to realize it was its curse. Every single person she knew had lived there forever. And yet, for a place with so much history, it felt like it had almost no past. The next day in class, Mr. Marrow returned their essays without a word. He walked to the blackboard and once again wrote a single sentence. This time it read, "Describe the night the power failed." Confused looks spread across the classroom. Students glanced at each other, shrugging. No one could remember a blackout. When Hannah hesitantly raised her hand, Mr. Marrow seemed to anticipate her question before she even spoke. You were asleep, he said, his gaze sweeping over the class. Most of you were. After class, as Hannah was at her locker, a boy named Tanner Rhodes caught up with her. You believe this guy? He asked, jerking his head back toward the classroom. He's weird, she admitted. Tanner shrugged. Weird's half the teachers here. But it was more than just weird. Later, standing in the school parking lot as the sun dipped below the pine trees, Hannah watched the streetlights flicker on. And then the entire block went dark. The lights dimmed for just a heartbeat, maybe two. When they blazed back to life, something felt different. The horizon seemed to have shifted, just slightly. Her car was exactly where she'd parked it, but the air held the faint, wrong smell of burnt ozone. That evening, Driven by a new, unsettling curiosity, Hannah went to the parish archives online. She started searching for any public record of a town-wide blackout. As she scrolled, she found something far more disturbing. The years 1959 through 1971 were just gone. An entire 12-year span was missing. No birth announcements, no death certificates, no school reports. It was just a string of missing files, a massive shadowy gap in the town's history. When she turned from her computer screen back to her desk, her heart jumped into her throat. There, lying on her keyboard, was a folded sheet of paper. It was school letterhead. In the top corner, a name was printed, E. Marrow. Below it, a single line was written in sharp red ink. Look under 1971. How did it get there? She lived alone with her dad, who was out for the night. The doors were locked. A cold dread washed over her. The next day, she went to class with the note tucked securely beneath her sleeve. Mr. Marrow said nothing about it. He didn't even look her way, except for one quick, knowing glance toward her desk as he began his lecture. The topic? Unreliable narrators. After the final bell, Hannah knew she couldn't let it go. She found the courage to confront him as he was packing his briefcase. "Why tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Because you noticed." "Noticed what?" He paused, his hands stilling over his papers. "That the road out doesn't go anywhere." Before Hannah could even process what that meant, he was gathering his things again. "Every story repeats, Miss Guidry," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Some people get to rewrite it, others are written in." And with that, he was gone, leaving her alone in the empty classroom. Outside, the familiar thrum of Highway 3 pulsed through the still air. It was a steady sound, a rhythm she'd heard her whole life, but now it sounded different. It was a pulse that faded and then circled back, a sound that never quite seemed to leave. That night, Hannah dreamed of the school. The hallways twisted at impossible angles. The classroom doors hung open like silent, screaming mouths. And from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, she could hear whispers, 1,000 voices all repeating Mr. Marrow's first question, over and over again. "Describe the thing this town pretends not to remember." She woke before dawn, her heart pounding against her ribs, and she could smell it, faintly, clinging to her hands and the air in her room. The smell of chalk. What is happening in plain dealing? What is the secret everyone is pretending not to remember? And who, or what, is Mr. Marrow? This is just the beginning of the mystery. If you want to find out what happens next, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for part 2. Thanks for watching.